Ceann Comhairle, I propose to take questions 5 to 9 together. Committee B last met on the 22nd of October. The committee covers the areas of social policy and public service reform, including education, children, social inclusion, Irish, arts and culture, and continued improvements in reform of the public service. The Cabinet Committee system aims to ensure a coordinated approach to delivery of relevant commitments in the Programme for Partnership Government and provides the opportunity to shape proposals on issues such as equality and disability, which require input from the multiple departments. The aim of government is to ensure that the policies and services approved in advance by Cabinet Committee B bring about sustainable improvements in people's lives, particularly the most vulnerable, and introduce supports and opportunities to help those on the margins of society fulfil their potential and lead full and engaged lives. Through policy interventions at Cabinet Committee level, government has introduced a number of sustainable reforms aimed at improving the lives and the standard of living of those most in need. These include affordable childcare, ratification of the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, advancing a number of important gender equality measures, and the development of an in-school speech and language therapy service, the pilot of which is now underway.
You just mentioned speech and language therapies, but that's not the point I was going to make in it. But there's a chronic crisis out there in relation to speech and language and the availability for young kids, especially even to get diagnosis and to go on. But on the social policy, on social policy and public service, does the Taoiseach accept that there is a huge percentage? I would almost go as far as to say that there's 10 to 15% of society outside of any engagement or with services, or that there are communities that are disadvantaged right across the country, not just in the large urban centres, but in rural places as well, and that for generational issues they are outside of the state. They are not contributing to their community, not engaged in their community, and become more and more isolated as the generations pass. And would the Taoiseach not accept that one of the major challenges to society, going back 50 years ago, education and free education has delivered enormously for society, but the next major challenge for those that are at the periphery of society and those that are most disadvantaged is how to engage these people back into communication, to society, and it is through education that will be there. But there is no sense at government level that there's a coherent strategy either in the Department of Health or in the Department of Justice or the Department of Education to see can we tackle the social isolation that young people and old people from various strands of society feel and are experiencing. And maybe I'll come back to that at a subsequent question. Barrett.
Our public services are in bits. We know about the public housing crisis. We know about the dire situation in our public health service. One that is less remarked about, but is very severe as well, is the crisis in third level education. And that crisis was not in any way addressed or acknowledged in your recent budget. And you may have noted that the Irish Universities Association have put out a statement expressing significant regret at the failure of the government to address the funding crisis for third level education. USI and other student union bodies have also expressed huge disappointment at your failure to address the funding crisis for third level education and indeed for student poverty. So, do you acknowledge we have a crisis, Minister, that we are at the bottom of the league table in Europe in terms of funding per student? The Association of Universities helpfully put out a graph with their statement comparing Ireland with other countries in Europe, and it showed that where in Finland there's a state investment of 20,000 per student, in Germany 10,000, in the Netherlands 14,000, in Norway 16,000, in Sweden 19,000, in Ireland it's 5,000 per student. 5,000, a tiny fraction of what is invested in third level education across Europe. And that per student investment is going to further decline because, according to the Minister's budget speech, we're expecting another 18,000 people to enter further education and university over the next number of years, but the budget gave a 1% increase in funding, about 19 million extra euro. Nothing. Not a drop in the ocean. Will be mopped up many times over by the increased student numbers. Do you acknowledge there's a problem here, Taoiseach, and have you any intention of doing something about this funding crisis in third level education?
Louise O'Reilly, please.
Count Corley. Taoiseach, I'm sure you were aware that schools built by Western Building Systems are now under investigation by the Department of Education. The structure of these schools, and you just spoke earlier about the services and references being made to how woefully inadequate they are. Inadequate and all as they are, you certainly can't access them if you don't have a school building to go to. So there are students in my own constituency and in yours who are in schools and their parents are worried. They're naturally very, very anxious. What has been found are significant structural issues. These, I understand, relate to fire safety concerns, particularly in Ardgillan Community College. My understanding is that the part of the school that was built by Western Business Building Systems now is closed. The kids are not in school this week. They're off next week like all kids are, but they want to know, are there any plans for those children, for those students? Where are they going to go? Where are they going to be accommodated? There's already serious pressure on school accommodation in North County Dublin as it is. For Maggots.
I suppose first of all, in relation to Deputy Moynihan's contribution, I understand and I take some of the points he made. I'm not sure I fully understood the question, but perhaps if you want to come back on the supplementary, I'd be happy to answer it again, or try to answer it once I understand the question. In relation to Deputy Boyd Barrett, I acknowledge the shortcomings and challenges and failures that exist in our public services in Ireland, but listening to Deputy Barrett again and again and again, you would think that we lived in the worst country in the world here in Ireland, that this was some sort of wasteland, that this was an awful place in which to live, an awful place in which to be a citizen. And yet this is a country that the UN Human Development Index ranks 4th in the world. That's not a measure of GDP, that's not a measure of the size of our economy. That's when you take into account things like health and education and life expectancy and the quality of our public services. And the UN Human Development Index ranks us 4th in the world, up from 10th or 11th place not that long ago. And if a small UN committee made a criticism of Ireland, Deputy Boyd Barrett would be the first on his feet to tell us how awful we are. Yet when the UN Development Programme, with its well-respected Human Development Index, ranks us 4th in the world, he doesn't want to acknowledge that. Again, Ireland is rising, for example, when it comes to the Social Progress Index, has been now for a number of years. He doesn't want to acknowledge that. When we look at the CSO statistics, the Survey of Income and Living Conditions, showing that in Ireland that poverty is falling, that deprivation is falling, that income inequality is narrowing, that inequality as measured by the Gini coefficient is narrowing, again, he doesn't want to acknowledge any of that. And he doesn't want to acknowledge the fact that employment levels in Ireland are now at the highest. So, it seems to me that there's very much a double standard here. He wants to come in, use every example of anything that's wrong in the country, but never acknowledge the progress that we are making in this country, and never acknowledge the fact that when you take it in the round, Ireland is a good country. This is a good place to live, and we offer our citizens a lot of opportunities. And yes, we can do better, but if you want to do better, you start by acknowledging what's going well, and then you try to fix the things that are wrong. You don't just rubbish everything and everyone and everything they do. That's a defeatist and nihilistic attitude and won't bring about any positive change for any citizens in our country, in my view. In relation to higher education specifically, the budget provides for an increase of between 50 and 60 million next year. That's funded by an increase of 0.1% in employers' PRSI and comes on top of a similar increase last year. And we've also identified in the National Training Fund a super surplus of about 300 million, and that money will also be available to our higher education institutions. And Project Ireland 2040 includes a pretty major investment in our higher education institutions, in our universities, in our ITs, and you only have to travel around the country and visit our colleges and ITs to see how many new buildings have been built in the last couple of years, and we're going to see a lot more than that. So this is the 3rd year in a row, or at least 2019 will be the 3rd year in a row in which we see a significant increase in funding for our third level institutions. And we always have to bear in mind it's not just a simple calculation of how much money is spent. If we divided the number of patients, if we divide the total amount of money we spend on health in Ireland by the number of patients, we're one of the highest spending countries in the world when it comes to health. But spending doesn't necessarily result in outcomes. And the same thing applies in education. I think it's a very simplistic and facile analysis just to take the budget and divide it by the number of students or divide it by the number of patients. What actually matters is the outcomes and delivery for people, delivery for patients, and delivery for students. If it was just about spending more money, I think our problems would be very easy to solve. Of course, it's about much more than that. Picking up on Deputy O'Reilly's question in relation to the schools. First of all, I want to say, of course, that what's paramount for us is the safety of students and of staff. It's going to be necessary to inspect about 40 schools that were built by this particular company. We'd anticipate that work will be done this week over the Halloween break, and we'd anticipate that work being completed by the middle of November. In some cases, works are going to be needed, and those works will be done. In some cases, it may be necessary to partially vacate or entirely vacate some schools. In others, it may be possible to introduce temporary measures and do the works over the summer. We will pursue the builder in the courts. That's in fact already underway in relation to some of the fire safety issues. And it does certainly appear to me that corners were cut back in the Celtic Tiger period when it comes to the building of some of these schools, which is truly disgraceful in my view. We're in a very different position now. For the last couple of years, a clerk of works is present every day on site when a school is being built to make sure it's built up to standard. But it certainly appears to us that prior to 2014, 2015, and particularly during the Celtic Tiger period, schools were built without proper oversight. Now we have to go back, make sure they're safe, fix them, and pursue the people responsible.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Deputy Moynihan.
I suppose there's 2 points to my question. One in relation to social policy, and you speak about everything that's right in this country. I preface my remarks by one of the greatest social changes was free education at second level education has empowered 2 and almost 3 generations of people now, and that has certainly worked enormously well. But we have, I believe that there could be as high as 18%, 10 to 15% of society, of people that are severely disadvantaged in where they're living, severely disadvantaged because of family backgrounds and so forth, and social problems, drug addiction and everything else, and they're living in all over the country, they're dispersed not just in the large urban centres. And the major policy change, or the major challenge to society as we go forward as a society, is how we are going to develop a social policy, a coherent social policy that's going to empower these people. Like, people 50 years ago used the education services to improve their lot. They are not engaging with the education services, they're not engaging with the health services, they're not engaging with society as a whole in terms of community activity or anything else. And the major social policy is what's the government's thinking? It has come up at any of the special cabinet committees to look at what social policy should be developed. It's not an easy question, but it is a challenge for society as we go forward.
Okay, can I take 2 very brief supplementaries? Deputy Barrett and Deputy O'Reilly.
Taoiseach, there's nothing facile about my analysis of funding of third level education. This is an analysis that has been provided by the Association of Universities. Okay, they're academics. So I think you should take them a little bit more seriously than just trying to score political points. And they are pointing out that we are spending a small fraction of what most other European countries are spending per student. And the analysis of the health, or the comparison with health, is facile from you, because of course it's failing to acknowledge that quite a considerable amount of that expenditure is out of the pocket expenditure by people paying A&E charges, paying overnight bed charges, paying prescription charges. That's all included in the expenditure, and for that matter private health insurance. Public funding of health is a very different matter, but we're talking here about universities. And the point is, we are way down the league table, and our universities are now tumbling in the international rankings, and the Association of Universities, not mind the student unions, are saying there is a very serious problem. And I would have thought you should have acknowledge that is an issue and seek to respond in a sensible way.
Briefly, please.
Taoiseach, you mentioned that legal proceedings are underway in 4 out of 40 of the cases. Are there plans to initiate legal proceedings on the remainder? And with regard to the contingency arrangements, and reference was made earlier to whether or not it's spin versus substance and all of that, there will have to be an information rollout for the parents concerned. There's probably no need to hire an orchestra or someone to make a video about it, but it would be an idea if parents could get timely information. My understanding is the staff in our Gillen Community College moved very quickly to inform parents, but they still don't know what the plans are for the next number of weeks. So there is going to have to be some sort of an information rollout, and perhaps you might comment on that.
I see you have a topical issue later, so I'm sure the Minister for Education will be dealing with that in detail. Taoiseach, very brief response, if you would, please. Yeah,
just in relation to Western Building Systems, yes, there is legal action underway in respect of 4 schools where fire safety related works have been or are being carried out by the department, and that includes Ardgillen. We'll have to see how this issue develops with regard to structural problems in the schools. But if the company hasn't built these schools up to standard, well then, absolutely, it's the intention of the Department of Education and Government to pursue that company for damages in the courts as well. I agree with the Deputy in relation to information. It is very important that parents are afforded with information and that we give them information as soon as we possibly can. The priority, of course, is safety of students and staff. The second priority is to carry out the inspections of the 40 schools, to get that done as soon as we possibly can, to find out what kind of works need to be done, to get those works done, and to pursue the builder for the costs through the courts. In terms of Deputy Boyd Barrett's further contribution, I don't think there was a further question, but I did answer it in my previous contribution, which is that funding for higher education is being increased. It was increased last year and it will be increased next year as well. It's important that we make sure that the money is spent as well as possible, and we should judge ourselves on outcomes, not on how much we spend, and that applies, I think, across all areas of the public service. On social policy, again, I suppose I think I understand the question. I don't have the answer. Perhaps if the Deputy has specific examples, that there. Yeah, I certainly do. But what you referred to people who aren't accessing education or healthcare or employment and social protection services. I'm trying to think through exactly who you're referring to.